Hello, once again, and welcome to Herd Immunity News. Today, I've got the great pleasure in welcoming Mr. Jim Ferguson. Jim is a former Brexit Party PPC. He's an entrepreneur, he's a farmer, and he is lighting up Twitter, getting tens of millions of views, comments from all over the world, covering such matters as Ukraine, the French riots, the betrayal of Brexit, the World Economic Forum, its puppets. But let me just, first of all, before we get into talk about the subject that we are going to talk about tonight, which is Ukraine, welcome Mr. Jim Ferguson. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Marcus. Delighted to be back on with you and Herd Immunity News. Yeah, I'm doing okay. Thanks.
Well, that's it. With all that's going on around the world, then that's not too bad. But tonight, if that's okay with you, Jim, we're going to talk about what's going on over in Ukraine right now. Very recently, about a week ago, President Trump was giving a speech in Iowa, and he more or less said that what's going on with the Ukraine-Russia situation is more or less a huge money laundering racket. He went on to mention the money that we know that President Joe Biden has received via his son Hunter. This transaction is on the infamous laptop. Tucker Carlson has also come out and put the question of Ukraine. What is the American what are the American candidates going to do about it? Because they've spent over $75 billion, and more or less the same thing was said that we're hearing time and time again. No action, keep funding. What's going on, Jim?
Well, I think there's a lot of criminal activity going on, Marcus, is what I think. And I think that it's starting to come out. Burisma, which was the company that Joe Biden's son Hunter was involved with, was in receipt of millions and millions and millions of dollars. And of course, Joe Biden, he's a career politician. He's never really amounted to much in his career. He's part of the sort of the establishment, and he's led and is continuing to lead America to economic ruin. And let's hope that's all it is, because he's pushing all the buttons for a hot war with Russia right now, aided and abetted by Senators Lindsey Graham and various others who are little more than war hawks. But I think what we're seeing in Ukraine and what's coming out about Ukraine is the money laundering side of things. Millions, billions, in fact, of taxpayers' dollars have been going into there. It's not been properly checked. Indeed, when there was legislation proposed for keeping all the amounts of money that was going over there to be all the checks and balances to be in place, Biden's administration knocked that back. So what it looks like to me is a bit of a crooked criminal type crime family that's basically just washing all the money in Ukraine, laundering it. I don't think there's anything else other than that, apart from the fact that he is pretty incompetent as well. And of course, there's a lot of people in and around him who are of the same ilk. But one other thing that is interesting to note, and which we've probably heard things happening with, but nothing ever really sort of coming out from the American side, and that was the biolabs in Ukraine. There was certainly a lot of them. And of course, one of the things that the Russians were particularly disturbed about was when they discovered that some of those biolabs were running experiments on the Russian Slavic people for some form of biological weapon that could target them specifically. So Victoria Nuland, on an interview which was about a few months ago, kind of let slip that they didn't want Russia to get into those biolabs to find out what was there. And I think the whole thing stinks, if I'm being really honest with you. It's corruption at its extreme.
That's right. And until Victoria Newland blurted that out under an excellent cross-examination by Ron Paul, I think it was at the time, it was all conspiracy theory, Jim. People like you and I were just pro-Putin, and we weren't seen as people looking for a peace agreement. We were just seen as pro-Putin communists, and this was the smear that these people always tried to do when it comes to them being caught out red-handed. And as you correctly say, there are weapons labs right on the border between Ukraine and Russia. But if I can just ask for a little bit of context to this that maybe not everybody knows about, is from 2014, the changes that actually went on in Ukraine. There was a regime change handed over because the former leadership were not in favor of EU expansion or NATO expansion, certainly NATO membership, because they knew this would be a red rag to Russia and Mr. Putin. What can you add to that?
Well, Viktor Yanukovych was the democratically elected president there. When the Colour Revolution, the Maidan, the CIA orchestrated coup started, he did everything he could to maintain order and had some success at the beginning. But I remember distinctly watching his security forces, who were all disarmed, by the way. They weren't allowed to carry weapons or sidearms, which they normally would have done there. But he didn't want anybody to lose their lives. And so there was a bit of a sting operation where people were shot. But it came out that it wasn't Yanukovych's forces that had pulled the trigger. It was agent provocateurs. So, we saw the whole thing spiraling down. He obviously left, went to Russia. And then we had a succession of Western puppets basically put into place that the CIA were handling and basically instructing them on what to do and what to say.
Absolutely. And the people will point to the Minsk agreement and the Minsk arrangement, which was basically, correct me if I'm wrong, this was an agreement between Russia and Ukraine to say that there would be no NATO membership, there would be no EU expansion in that area, and that weapons would be kept well away from the border.
That's right. There's actually a video that's come to light quite recently of a panel of them sitting there. We had Putin on the far left of the team, and then we had Zelensky on the other side, and we had a couple other people in the middle. And while Putin was reading out or talking about signing and going ahead with the Minsk agreements, you can actually see Zelensky laughing, putting his hand up in front of his face and sniggering effectively, because he knew at that point that the Minsk agreements were not going to be kept by Angela Merkel, Germany, Francois Hollande of France, or anybody else that was part of the brokerage of it. He knew back then that it was simply and had been simply to stall time. And the previous premiers that were in there were also of the same opinion. They knew also that this was simply to give time for the Kiev forces to build up their weapon supplies, and then they were going to attack the Donetsk, Luhansk areas in the east of the country.
Absolutely, and you and I have touched on, we've touched on the story that happened last year, I think it was, where Zelensky and Putin's representatives were around a table and they were putting a peace plan in place, and this was kiboshed by Boris Johnson. I mean, Boris Johnson seems to be an absolutely chaotic character that has the Midas touch in reverse. We have characters like that, such as Tobias Hillwood, which people in the United States might not know who he is. And that's probably a grace that they don't know who he is, but there's plenty of information on these type of characters online. But can I just ask you, moving forward, we've looked at President Trump and his resolutions. He says that he can do this, get this resolved, have a peace deal in a day. Do you believe him?
Absolutely. And the reason I believe that Trump would be able to do that, if President Trump, for somehow or in some way, was made president again, and provided we're not all radiated by the time he gets to that point, then I would say that he would absolutely be able to do that deal with Putin, because there is a mutual respect. And you have to understand that they are both very tough characters. They're not the kind of characters that you want to be playing games with. Putin's highly dangerous. I would say Trump is equally robust in what he does. But actually, I don't believe any of them, when I'm talking about Putin or Trump, I don't believe any of those two guys actually want a hot war with each other, because they know the consequences of what that would be and what it would do to the entire planet. Instead, I think they are respectful of each other. They both admire each other's strength and commitment, the fact that they are true born leaders in their own right. and one, shall we say, alpha male can always identify another alpha male. Likewise, we can also see those who are little more than soy boys, like Biden. So I think basically, when Trump says that he could get a deal done, he means it. He's sincere about it. And I think if he was ever in a position where he could actually make that work, Putin rather would respond, and would probably the whole thing would be over before he knew it.
Absolutely. And I always think it's ironic that the Remainer class in the European Union talk about maintaining Ukraine's sovereignty when they drove a coach and horses through everybody else's national sovereignty from the formation of the European Union. It's quite ironic, and you just have to shake your head at these characters that they're so unbelievable. And the narrative is now that, sorry, Jim, I was just going to say the narrative is now that all the cost of living crisis that we had from COVID, it's now shifted on to Ukraine. The food shortages that we're seeing, the networks and the infrastructure, the shipping, the transportation of food, it's now coming into this whole spider's web. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think we're only starting to see how that's going to play out, because there are some whispers, if you want. Nothing's appeared concrete in the media yet, but there are certainly those people that I've been speaking to in the UK who have noticed certain things happening. And I don't want to get too much into that at this point, but I think what we might be looking at is a blockade of the Black Sea. We know that the grain exports have fallen through, or at least I shouldn't say fallen through, that they have expired in terms of the time and agreements with Russia. Russia have said that those agreements are now over, and that any shipping that's coming into the Black Sea and heading for Ukraine, effectively under Zelensky, may well be considered to be a military, target. We might actually see a blockade taking place in the Black Sea. And that's pretty serious, because that's going to affect a lot of other things, in particular grain exports and other matters of trade that could be getting taken out through those areas. So, yeah, I think that things are continuing to unravel. Things are not settling down. The offensive, the much touted offensive that Zelensky was going on about in terms of beating back Russia and invading Russia, all the Bradley fighting vehicles, all the German Leopard tanks, they're all smouldering wrecks, or at least a lot of them are. And the offensive has completely and utterly failed. They haven't even managed to penetrate the first line of defense along those designated areas. And there are multiple layers of defenses there along the line of contact. So it's been a failure, an absolute failure, and a massive loss of life on both sides, but actually in particular on the Ukrainian side.
Absolutely. And not so long ago, they said that Russia was going to be overthrown by the Wagner Group when a few tanks and soldiers rocked up into Russia. But this was only to be discovered that they were just being relocated to Belarus. And they're sitting up there waiting further instruction. Absolutely insane. But this is the same mainstream legacy media, Jim, that told us that Putin had cancer of every part of the body. He was dying. He was insane. It's just unbelievable what they expect people to swallow.
Well, if you still foolish enough to watch the likes of the BBC, then you're going to be believing anything that they tell you. And
CNN,
CNN,
fake news.
Yeah, fake news. Yeah,
yeah.
I've just sort of been having a bit of fun over the last few days, Marcus. You've maybe seen some. In fact, I think you've retweeted some of them, where the crazy pictures of people and the weather maps, and it's red, or it's lava. It's like
Mordor.
lava around all the seas, and exactly, like Mordor, Lord of the Rings kind of esque type scenarios. It's just crazy and it's stupid. I suppose there are people that are buying into cancelling their holidays because they think they're going to end up paddling in a sea of lava, molten lava around Italy's shores or Rome's shorelines. But you know something, I think a lot of people are waking up to the nonsense that's going on there. And it's nonsense wherever you look. I think the other big factor in all of this, though, is why are they doing it? Well, I think they're trying to frighten people, Marcus. They are trying to make people live in fear. And of course, there's a psychological 101 textbook that they use because they know that if people are frightened, they become much more easily controlled. People won't question the government then. If they're distracted by these types of scenarios, while they're looking at that, they're not looking at other things. And I think the elitists know that. They play it very well, or at least they have done up to this point. I think people are starting to wake up to the tactics that are used. And let's not forget, during the pandemic, that our own British government used a psychological warfare on its own people. So we have to understand what they're capable of.
Absolutely. And again, you and I would be called mad, swivel-eyed conspiracy theorists, Jim. And then as it's come to pass, the 77th Brigade in the United Kingdom were used as a wing, a propaganda wing, a disinformation wing to scare the public, as you correctly say, into action, into doing things that they wouldn't normally do. There's a great experiment that was done, I think, in the 60s called the Milgram experiment, where people were asked to increase amps or voltage onto people in another room. And if they got the answer wrong, they were to just keep increasing till eventually there wouldn't be any noise from the room. And I think it was something like 90% of people would comply, even though the other person may have died. So that's kind of trauma. Yeah. We've been under non-stop trauma when you think about it, since just after Brexit, coincidentally, just after the 2019 election in December, which you and I both fought. There's been a non-stop traumatizing, whether it be climate, war, the pandemic. And it's put people in that state of flux where they're very vulnerable and more likely to make mistakes. That's why information that you're putting out is essential, that people can actually have a look, making a balanced judgment. Now, just, if I may, can we talk about our British Armed Forces? Is that okay? Because lots of people are quite concerned to see how this is being whittled back at a time where WEF Rishi Sunak tells us that we are in a state of emergency. There's alarmism going on about potential war. And our armed forces since 1982 overall have gone from 320,000, this is all the personnel, down to less than half, about 150,000. Our army, our boots on the ground, which would be needed for any true battles, is down to 73,000, putting us 33rd in the world. That's the size of our army. The spending that we've done already, Biden spent 75 billion American US taxpayer dollars on Ukraine. UK have spent 7 billion, and the EU has signed up to give it 50 billion. So why are our armed forces being depleted so badly year in, year out? UK.
I think you just need to look at a comment that the EU made just within the last 24 hours about the Falkland Islands, referencing them as the Malvinas. I've reported on this, and I know that you have as well. That's a direct snub to Britain, because the Falkland Islands they are British sovereign territory. We fought a war over it with Argentina and we won, and liberated the Falkland Islands after they had been invaded by Argentinian forces. For the EU to turn around and say, refer to them as the Malvinas, of course it's been picked up on by Argentinian politicians who say, we now want to renegotiate this. Well, there's nothing to be negotiated. It belongs to Britain. It's Britain's sovereign territory. The islanders are all British subjects. There's nothing to negotiate. So, it's important that people in Britain understand that the EU are not our friends. And it's important to also clarify that when we talk about the EU, we don't mean Europe. We're talking about the European Union, and in particular, the Commission, the unelected bureaucrats that make all the decisions, not even the EU Parliament, because the parliamentarians, the lawmakers in the EU Parliament, actually can't pass any laws unless the EU Commission agrees. So there's no real true democracy in the EU. The European people themselves are finding that they are pretty much under a bit of a dictatorship with the EU as it stands currently. And I would just also draw your attention, don't want to get too far off the subject, Marcus, because I know we're talking about British Armed Forces here, but it is important to acknowledge this, that on the 25th of August, Thierry Breton, probably not pronouncing his name, Thierry Breton, I think his name
Mm.
is very proud of the fact that they're drawing a curtain down of censorship on the whole of Europe. And if they don't like what you're saying on Twitter or Facebook or whatever other means you're communicating, they can force that to be stopped. So that's something that needs to be watched very closely. Of course, Britain is technically not part of the European Union any longer, much to the annoyance of Hunt and Sunak. They're working hard to make sure that's reversed, of course, being the arch remainers that they are. But let's just tie it back into British forces. Europe wants their hands on the British military, the RAF, the Royal Navy, the British Army, and our security apparatus, being MI5, the Secret Intelligence Service, GCHQ, and all of the other offshoots of those establishments. So they want control. They don't mind if Britain says, yeah, we got Brexit done. Well, as far as they're concerned, when it comes to procurement for ammunition, PESCO, and having their hands in the whole parts of our defence, they don't mind if we say that we're no longer part of the European Union, as long as they've got control of our military.
Absolutely.
And that is what they're trying to do right now.
Absolutely, Jim. And in the meantime, we have wide open borders. If an insurgent force wished to, they could send over troops, they could send over guns, they can send over whatever they want. And with the numbers that we're looking at of illegals who are unknown, they could be anything from sinners to saints. This is not to say that there aren't genuine refugees out there and people that we should maybe look towards helping, but the majority of people in this country have had enough. This is if it's we're serious about this being a sovereign nation, we have to protect our borders. And the Prime Minister's number one focus, as you and I have banged the table about for years, is the United Kingdom. Isn't it a sick joke when we have the focus on Ukraine and its safety and its security, where our own borders are wide open?
Well, once again, it goes back to what we discussed at the beginning. I think there's a lot of criminality taking place, money laundering in Ukraine. I don't think we're there for holistic, wholesome reasons. When it comes to our own borders, that doesn't fit in with the globalists' vision of a one world government that they rule. And, you've got all these supranational bodies that will promote everything to do with globalism and try to destroy everything that's to do with national sovereign countries and states. So the open borders that they are foisting on everybody and trying to foist on Hungary and failing is because they know that if you do that, you will weaken and ultimately destroy that nation. And when that nation is brought to its knees because they don't have enough housing, and there's people on the streets, and there's not enough health care, and the law and order collapses because there's so much crime. And I mean, let's face it, we're seeing it breaking out everywhere we look. Every day, some woman or child is attacked, raped, or assaulted, or men are being attacked as well. And the refugees that are coming in aren't refugees at all. Refugees will be women and children. If you were fleeing from a country and you had a wife and a child or children, they're the ones you'd be putting on the boats, wouldn't it? So the fact that it's all young men that's coming in just goes to show that they are not refugees at all. They're not asylum seekers. They are economic migrants thinking that they're going to come in here and get handouts. I see that they're getting free cigarettes now, Marcus. Yeah. Had you heard that?
Well, I heard they're going to do donkey rides as well down at Weymouth. Kiss Me Quick hats are all at the ready, mobile phones. It's going to be like a love boat down there. God knows what they're going to get up to. But I spoke to Dave Atherton not so long ago, who's like yourself, fantastic contributor. Has got a huge fan base on Twitter, very popular. Says it as it is, like yourself, Jim. And he basically said what we have in Parliament right now is the Uni Party. This came from Steve Bannon, who he used to work for at Breitbart, and that's beautifully put. It's one big ugly blob called the Uni Party. They're all speaking from the World Economic Handbook. In fact, there's only maybe one or two people that I can think of off the top of my head that I've got any concerns about this. Andrew Bridgen is one, who's now with Reclaim. And the other one's maybe Sir Christopher Chope, who also spoke out about the damage and injuries done by the vaccine. So it is quite a sad reflection on where we've got to. That's why you and I, and thousands, millions like us, are looking for a new alliance. Where are we? Where are we on that?
Well, I would just also agree with your views on Dave Atherton.
Mm.
I followed him for a long time. He follows me, and we quite often share each other's tweets. He's a good guy, and he calls it like it is. Where are we? Well, I think probably in terms of any meaningful alliance, that there are still people, there are still political organisations that are willing to talk, that are just more than happy to discuss, a unite the right type of party or organisation that could actually be a serious challenge to the uni party of Labour and the Conservatives. But once again, there's a fly in the ointment, and until Reform gets their act together and agrees to play with everybody else, it's not going to happen, which is a real shame because there's some really good people in Reform.
Well, I won't entice you to go any further on any flies in the ointment. I would never do anything like that. But I certainly, yes, I concur, sir. I concur. And it was funny because Dave Atherton suggested that we call ourselves the classical liberals. And I said, please, no, because you'll have people thinking of Ed Davey, Joe Swinson, Mingus Campbell. We don't really want to go back to those horror years of thinking of these people. Nick Clegg. I mean, I think take the word liberal. He wants the word right out. I said there was a centre alliance, centre right alliance. Look, the name will be quite important because it's the umbrella that all of these parties that you and I have got great respect for. You're fantastic followers and your subscribers, my fantastic Herd Immunity News subscribers, and Dave's and the rest of our friends. These are the people that are going to have to make that decision to get under the same umbrella, get in the same tent to effect real change. Because as things stand right now, on their own, chances of getting any seats are slim. It's individuals.
Mm. Yeah, they certainly are, and I think people need to wake up and understand that this is it's moved on from left and right. It really has, and there's people out there on the right that will refuse to engage with anybody that's even remotely left of centre, and it's unfortunate, but I do know people like that. There are also people on the left. If you're anywhere at right of centre, they won't talk to you, or they think you're something, or they start calling you names. It's crazy. But actually, there are an awful lot of people around the centre ground of politics, left and right, that are quite reasonable. And I met a lot of them in Barnsley. They were decent people. They were Brexiteers. And what we need to do is to find common ground with people. We need people that are in leadership positions that are willing to work with other people. You might not agree with everything that they say or their particular position on certain matters, whether it might be NHS or it might be immigration or it might be defence or it could be education. It could be 101 different things. You can't expect people to agree with everything that you think or that you wouldn't agree with them on. But there are things that we can find common ground on. So, for example, I put out a tweet about Liverpool last night, fairly late on, and it started to light up again. And I can see the signs when it happens, because you put it out there, and before you know it, it's starting to go. I can't remember what it's at, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not far off 500,000 by this point. So it was to do with the 15-minute type zones in Liverpool. And, the Scousers are a great bunch. They'll have a fight at a drop of a hat. They're even worse than us Scots, and that's saying a lot.
And they like a drink.
But no, they're good people.
Yeah.
Aye, yeah, they do.
They like a wee drink.
But listen, well, that's right. Nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, they're talking about corralling them into 19 different zones. They're going to put 19 managers in charge of these 19 districts. Yeah. It's like something straight out of the Hunger Games, Marcus. Yes. It's just so dystopian. And of course, it lit up and it took off like lighting a patch of dry grass. It just went boom.
Like a BBC weather chart.
I like a BBC of all colours. So I don't know, how they're going to take it. I mean, there might be people on the left that will say, "Oh no, this is what we want."
Yeah.
There will be undoubtedly people like that. But actually, we need to stop thinking along those political lines and stop voting along purely political lines as well. We need to start thinking about what do we really want from the people that are going into these positions? And do you really want another career politician? Do you really want somebody that's connected to the World Economic Forum?
No,
I don't think so.
no. I mean, absolutely right. There were issues that cut through all the left and right narratives of the past. The lockdowns, COVID, as you say, Brexit. You had some fantastic interactions with former Labour voters during your fantastic run in Barnsley. And these issues were cutting through mass unlimited immigration, rising crime, drugs. These now you can't really distinguish between Labour and the Conservatives, as you've seen recently. Keir Starmer's actually pulling back on some socialist policies of the cap on the benefits on the child allowance for 2 children. He's put his foot down on that. Now he knows he has to because there is no money to keep funding and funding. But there are 3 or 4 cheeks of the same backside. And as you say, we need a leader of this alliance, someone like Nigel, who can just say, look at the support he's got recently over the disgraceful treatment at the hands of Coutts Bank, Jim. He's really it's just done him a wonder of good, and he's got such support now. It's probably made him, I don't know, maybe more powerful than ever. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it was somebody, Alison, somebody, I can't remember her name, of Coutts, that's written a letter of apology. I was actually just reading it before I came on. I just can't quite remember her name.
Yes.
But she's an arch Remainer. You know, she's disdainful of anybody that wants Britain to be successful and prosperous. And you've got to remember, I think Coutts is linked into NatWest that took over RBS. Royal Bank of Scotland changed their name because they were involved in so many criminal activities that they got charged for and prosecuted successfully for. And how they're still allowed to be operating is beyond me. I think if I was ever in a position to, I think I would have a massive clearing out of the banks, and every single person that's defrauded and used their position to harm businesses and people would probably end up being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. So, you know, these people are bad people. And what we've seen with them targeting Nigel Farage in her letter of apology, she doesn't mean a word of it. She's only doing it because she's been caught out. But how many other things have they been doing that they haven't been caught out yet? That's what I'd like to know.
The hypocrisy and the double standards are just unbelievable when you think there are convicted criminals in these so-called salubrious banks. So this was a pure hate campaign towards over 1,000 people, I think, Jim, and yourself, if you don't mind me saying, you were someone who has faced similar persecution for your beliefs. Extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was worse, much worse. It was only one particular account. It was a while back, and it didn't really make much difference. But I mean, for Nigel, it was all of his accounts, and then he couldn't open up any accounts with, I think, the sort of the 10 main banks. So yeah, I think they've realised they've gone too far, and I think they've probably rather childishly thought, oh well, Nigel's getting some good publicity out of this, so that's backfired on them as well, which is good.
Well, we've covered quite a lot tonight. We start, but with good reason, sir, with good reason. All it remains is for me to thank you, Mr. Jim Ferguson, once again. I would encourage anyone that hasn't gone on to Jim's Twitter feeds, onto his interviews that he's doing with people all around the world. He did a fantastic one the other day with Stu Peters, who he got a good bit of time on there, but I'm sure he's going to be a regular on that show. Check out Jim's Twitter page, check out his website, get involved with what he's doing, and same with Herd Immunity News. Please come on board, join us, join in the discussion, because we love having your ideas and everything else like that. So keep it coming. Jim, thanks once again, sir, and I hope to chat with you soon. Take care.
My pleasure, Marcus. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye.